Chapter 55. A passion born among ruins and promises. Caelan refused the servant's help and undressed in silence, exhausted. The wide bed called to him like a refuge, but his mind knew no rest. Ardren had warned that gathering men for an escort would take weeks. Too long. The longer the galley lingered off the coast, the easier it would be for King John's patrols to discover it. He could take his own men north, but that would endanger them all. Aemon would insist on going with him, and that was unthinkable. If it were discovered that they were transporting the king's cousin, the outcome would be far worse: treason, death. Reason whispered that prudence lay in returning to Normandy, and entrusting Eira's fate to others. But his heart roared otherwise. He didn't want to leave her. He closed his eyes, lying in the dimness, knowing sleep would not come. Each breath carried her memory, the echo of her voice, the touch of her hands, the fragile way she had clung to him on the shore. And he understood, with the weight of certainty, that it wasn't danger or the king's patrols he feared. He feared losing her. Chapter 56. The Vanished Galley. Exhausted by sleepless hours and the clash of thoughts, Eira surrendered to sleep, without finding a way to cross England without falling into King John's grasp. But at dawn the truth struck her with cruel clarity. For years she had dreamed of returning to Cambria, and now she understood that such a wish was futile. There awaited only control, distrust, and solitude. The thought brought a strange calm. Caelan's life was worth more than her return. She rose, wrapped in the pale light of morning, and walked to the window. The calm shattered in an instant. Caelan's galley was gone. She gripped the windowsill, her heart pounding. "He cannot have left without saying goodbye," she whispered. Throwing a blanket around her shoulders, she opened the door. A massive mastiff rose to attention, and she took a step back. Seeing the calm in its eyes, she extended a trembling hand. "Have you been here all night?" she murmured. The dog sniffed her fingers, and stepped aside just as another mastiff appeared, accompanied by a figure emerging from the hallway. Caelan. Eira rushed toward him without thinking. "The galley is gone," she cried, her voice breaking. I thought you had left." He held her firmly, his senses filling with the scent of lavender in her hair, the tremor of her body against his. "I'm here," he said gently. "Aemon must have sought a safe cove. He would never abandon us." Eira remained still in his arms, breathing in the sound of his voice. "I thought you'd left me," she murmured. "I couldn't," he replied, brushing her hair aside. "Not without saying goodbye." His fingers freed a stray lock, and the blanket slipped to the floor. Suddenly aware of the warmth of her body against his, Caelan tensed. A discreet cough broke the moment. "I sent men last night to alert Aemon," Ardren announced from the doorway, smiling. "They've hidden the galley in a nearby bay." Caelan didn't release Eira. She didn't seem to want him to. "Thank you, cousin," he said hoarsely. "Eira thought I'd fled." Ardren raised a brow, amused, though his expression soon turned grave. "There's more. News came from our Lalamant kin. They're part of the king's retinue. John arrived at Hastings Castle last night." Silence fell like a stone. Caelan felt the weight of duty and danger. He looked at Eira, her eyes wide with shock. How could he tell her that her cousin the king was only a few miles away? Her return to England had just become a trap. Chapter 57. Two paths. If Eira could have absorbed Caelan's strength, her fears would have vanished like mist before the sun. The warmth of his body, the weight of his breath, the unconscious firmness with which he held her were enough to make her believe for an instant that he desired her, that his closeness was more than compassion. A noble man, a refuge, a love that claimed her. That was all she had ever dreamed of. But Ardren's voice, distant and tense, broke the spell. Caelan stepped back sharply. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his eyes turned to steel. "King John is at Hastings Castle." A chill ran down her spine. "That's very near." 60 miles, perhaps less," he replied. "He's inspecting the coast. He fears a French invasion." Eira understood before he said it. Then he'll find us. Caelan drew the blanket over her shoulders, his voice low and steady. Get dressed. We'll talk over breakfast. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. She stepped away on unsteady feet, her heart in pieces. For a moment she had believed in a shared destiny, in the possibility of love, but the king's shadow always returned to claim her, a curse without end. Caelan spoke of strategy, of routes and precautions. She longed only to hear a promise, a single word that would make her feel loved, not imprisoned by her bloodline. While the maid helped her dress, Eira made a silent decision. If danger fell upon them, she would surrender herself to the king before letting Caelan pay the price of protecting her. Sacrifice was the only path she knew. And that thought, more than the cold, made her tremble. As I see it, said Adran, Eira has two choices. Caelan, sitting stiffly at the end of the table, answered with a curt gesture. Let's wait for her to come, before deciding for her. We can at least eat in the meantime, his cousin replied, calmly serving himself. Isolde followed suit, with a conciliatory smile. Caelan didn't touch his food. He tapped his fingers against the table's edge, eyes fixed on the door. When she finally joined them, she barely took a piece of bread. That wouldn't feed a sparrow, Adran observed. I'll eat when we have a plan, Caelan said curtly. What if you ask her to return with you to Normandy? Adran suggested. Caelan looked at him, uncertain. Part of him wanted to. Another part feared her answer. It's not that simple, he said at last. Isolde spoke gently. Our ancestor Gareth had to choose once too. He defied the conqueror's wrath for love, and won. Caelan gave a humorless smile. Once he would have dismissed such an idea with cynicism. Now he couldn't. Eira wasn't Celine. Everything with her was different. King John holds no power in Normandy, Adran added. But Philip of France does, Caelan replied. And I've no doubt he'd use any excuse to claim her. His patience snapped. He tossed his napkin onto the table, and rose to his feet. I'll go find her. Let me, said Isolde, standing as well. And try not to look so desperate. Caelan took a long drink of ale and sighed. It was absurd, a hardened soldier nervous over a woman. But not just any woman. Eira was strong, radiant, and her very presence made him feel alive again. He decided he wouldn't let fear or the past stand between them. He was going to ask her to stay. Isolde's trembling voice shattered the thought when she returned to the hall, pale, her hair disheveled. She's gone. Caelan shot to his feet. Gone? Where? He demanded, though his heart already knew the answer. Eira had never stolen a horse before, and she regretted it the instant the salty wind lashed her face. She had taken Adran's finest steed and ridden toward the sunrise. She knew Hastings lay to the east. She also knew Caelan would soon discover her absence. Perhaps he would feel relieved, free to return to Normandy without the burden of her. The wind tore tears from her eyes, mingling with sorrow. The coastal cliffs loomed to her right, the sea roared below. She kept riding, refusing to look back, until she heard hoofbeats approaching. A firm hand caught the reins. The horse neighed, rearing up, and Eira barely had time to cry out before Caelan pulled her from the saddle. He held her tight against his chest, his face flushed with fury and fear. Don't ever do that again. His voice was a ragged roar. For a moment, I thought I'd lost you. She trembled in his arms, feeling the wild thud of his heart against hers. It was for the best, she whispered, breathless. If I surrender to John, you'll be safe. Caelan looked at her, disbelief and anguish in his eyes. Safe, he repeated bitterly. I could never live knowing you were in his hands. Eira lifted her gaze, her face streaked with tears and dust. Why? She asked faintly. He took her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. For a moment, he seemed to wrestle with himself. Then, in a breath that was half surrender, half confession, he murmured, Because I love you, foolish woman. I love you more than I ever thought I could. The world seemed to stop. She stared at him, stunned, her soul opening like a wound of light. Then she smiled through her tears, and their lips met, hungry, relieved, trembling with all the fear and longing of those who had come too close to losing everything. The kiss was fire and truce both, a broken promise made new again. The end of all running. Chapter 58. Relief flooded him like a warm tide. Absurdly, Caelan felt grateful that Eira had run away. Only then had he found the courage to admit what he had spent so long denying. When their lips met, he wanted that kiss to speak for him, to say everything words could not: love, fear, desire, promise. Her tears burned against his skin. He brushed them away with his thumbs, looking at her as if he feared losing her again. "We must return to Waycroft Hall," he murmured. "We're too exposed here." Eira nodded, her voice barely a breath. "I stole a horse," she confessed. Caelan hadn't expected those words, but he saw the tremor in her mouth, and understood that fear had driven her to it. "Promise me you won't run again if I let you ride?" he asked softly. "I promise," she said, closing her eyes. But just the thought of King John. He helped her into the saddle, hearing in her voice a revulsion so deep that something inside him tightened. "Then why flee toward him?" he asked as he mounted his own horse. Eira looked at him, her eyes filled with resigned love. "For you," she whispered. "Because I love you too much to see you suffer because of me." Caelan lifted his gaze to the horizon, where the wind churned the waves as if the sea shared his turmoil. He could hardly believe that this woman, so unlikely, so wounded, was the one who had restored his faith in himself. He tightened the reins, determination hardening his voice. If he had found the courage to tell her earlier what he felt, they would never have left Normandy. But he would not lose her again. Not while he still had breath to fight for her. And as they galloped back, the wind carried a silent promise: they would survive together. Confessions. Eira dismounted, avoiding Ardren's gaze. "I stole your steed. I'm sorry." To her surprise, he smiled kindly. "I'm far more glad that Caelan found you than worried about a horse." She hadn't yet processed his words, when Isolde threw her arms around her. "Thank heaven you're safe." Eira looked over the young woman's shoulder, seeking the eyes of the man she loved. Caelan was watching her with that mixture of tenderness and gravity that always disarmed her. "My cousins knew before we did," he said, taking her hand. "That we loved each other. Now we can think of how to return to Normandy together." Ardren clapped him on the shoulder, breaking the moment. "The meal is ready. We'll talk as we eat." "Perfect," Caelan replied with a weary smile. "They dragged me out of bed before dawn. I'm famished." Eira, who once would have been scandalized by such familiarity, smiled shyly. "So am I. I was too nervous to eat a thing." He lifted her hand and kissed it gently. "Forgive me. That was a clumsy remark." "No," she said, shaking her head as they sat together. "I just need to learn to leave the past behind." Caelan gave a quiet laugh. "So do I." Eira glanced at him, then asked on impulse, "Celine?" He drew a deep breath, as if the name still pained him. "She left me for another." "Did you love her?" "Perhaps I only loved the idea of not being the man she rejected. It was pride that broke me, not my heart." Eira's voice softened. "Maybe we can help each other heal." He held her gaze. "I can't if I don't know what wounds you, Eira. It wasn't just the siege." She hesitated. "Speaking of the past was always like walking barefoot over embers. In Cambria they call me the Lady of Broken Betrothals," she confessed. "I was promised more times than I can count." "And why did you never marry?" Caelan asked, surprised. "Because my cousin King John forbade every suitor. He said they were unworthy, but I think he simply enjoyed the power he held over me. Once he promised me a husband who never appeared. Had I married without his consent, he would have imprisoned my parents and me. It's his idea of amusement." Caelan looked away, his jaw tightening. "And you never desired any of them?" Eira shook her head slowly. "No. I've never felt for any man what I feel for you." He looked at her for a long moment, emotion deepening his voice. "Then I'll never let anything come between us again." Caelan refocused on the plan. The galley will sail tonight, under cover of darkness. We must move before the king grows suspicious. Ardren nodded. I'll warn Aemon. It's the wisest course. Eira shivered. It's hard to believe I might finally escape him. Caelan squeezed her hand firmly. It was fate that led us to Caer Thalen. I won't let your cousin destroy what began there. As noon passed and the fire crackled in the hearth, Caelan watched her in silence. In his mind he already saw her in Normandy, at his side, laughing beneath the tapestries of Morven's hall, sunlight glinting in her red hair, and the future wide open before them. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe in happiness. Chapter 59. Eira accepted Ardren's advice to rest before their departure, but when Caelan accompanied her to her chamber, the truth spilled out uncontrollably. I'm afraid to be alone, she whispered. Stay with me. He drew a deep breath. Desire and hesitation mingled in his eyes. There's nothing I want more but… Please, she interrupted, her voice barely a breath. Unless Ardren or his sister would find it improper. Caelan smiled faintly and laced his fingers with hers. I doubt it. They already believe we're betrothed. And here in England, that's enough for them to consider you my wife. But we were never formally betrothed. He took her hand and placed it over his heart. Then I make it so now. Before God, Eira of Lysarne, I take you as my vow. His words thrummed with a certainty that set her soul alight. She looked into his eyes, trembling. And I take you, Caelan of Morven. Let God be our witness. The air between them thickened, as if the world itself held its breath. Eira rose on her toes, he cupped her face and kissed her. It was not their first kiss, but this time there was truth, love, surrender. She melted against him, feeling the fierce rhythm of his heart beneath her palms, the heat of desire burning between them. Caelan held her close, tasting her lips as if drinking in life itself. The air became a single shared breath. Her skin shivered as his lips traced down her neck to her throat. Eira moaned softly, lost between dizziness and tenderness. He slid a hand toward her breast but stopped, meeting her eyes with a glimmer of inner struggle. I want you, he murmured hoarse, but not like this. Not before we're wed. She could barely think, intoxicated by his nearness. Then, what will we do? Caelan smiled, his tenderness restrained. There are other ways to love without breaking the vow. Will you let me show you? Eira closed her eyes, her soul trembling with joy. Show me, she whispered. He drew her to him once more, and the world disappeared. There was no fear, no flight, no past. Only the present, the touch of his skin, the trembling of their lips, and the certainty that at last she knew. She loved him. And he loved her. Between awe and devotion. Desire burned through him, but Caelan knew he had to be gentle. She was a woman scarred by war and loneliness, and what now bloomed between them could not feel like conquest but surrender. Eira looked at him as if searching for something beyond comfort, a promise, a rebirth. When he brushed her skin, her breath faltered, and in that fragility Caelan found the certainty that he had discovered something more precious than victory or duty. Trust me, he murmured, his voice so low it was barely a tremor in the dimness. She nodded, unafraid, and her gaze became a refuge. What followed was a slow surrender, a kiss that stretched until the world dissolved, a caress that promised a future neither had dared to dream. There was no haste, no dominance, only two souls learning to breathe together, to recognize each other for the first time without masks or fear. When she clung to him, trembling, he understood that everything he had feared vanished in that closeness. And when silence wrapped around them, only one certainty remained, that this was no fleeting desire, but the beginning of something that would change them forever. You're beautiful, Caelan whispered, his voice trembling between wonder and devotion. Eira brushed his face with her fingertips, her eyes wet yet calm. Now I know, she said softly. Now I know what it means to love without fear. He held her with reverent care, as if in his arms he carried the redemption of them both. Outside the wind howled against the stone walls, but within that room the world stood still. Desire coursed through him like fire, yet Caelan knew he must be patient. He didn't want to claim her, he wanted to belong to her. In Eira's eyes he saw no fear, only a trembling tenderness that completely disarmed him. She lifted her hand and touched his face, the most fragile and courageous gesture in the world. "With you, I'm not afraid," she whispered. "It's as if my soul remembers something it had forgotten." Caelan closed his eyes for a moment. "Then let us remember it together," he murmured. "If I've ever believed in something sacred, it is now, with you." She smiled, her lips quivering slightly. Their breaths mingled, and for an instant the world narrowed to the shared rhythm of their hearts. There was no sin, no duty, only the naked truth of two beings who had finally found each other. "I thought love was an illusion," Eira said, her voice broken as if speaking in a dream. "A word invented to comfort the lonely. But you make me believe." Caelan drew her closer, his cheek pressed into the hollow of her neck. "I doubted too," he confessed. "I've spent years fighting, running from myself. And now I know, the war ends here with you." She rested her forehead against his, their fingers intertwined over his chest, where she felt the heartbeat of the life they had vowed to share. "If tomorrow the sea separates us," she said, "remember this: there is no land, no king, no destiny that can claim what we are." "Nothing will tear me from you," he answered. "If I fall, I'll return. If I'm lost, you'll find me. That is my vow, Eira." Their lips met again, slower, deeper, as if they were rediscovering an ancient language. In that kiss lay everything left unspoken, the pain of what they'd lived, the miracle of reunion, the certainty that for the first time they were not alone. The wind battered the shutters with the fury of the sea, but within that room time stood still. When at last they parted, she looked at him with tears that no longer hurt. "Now I know," she breathed. "What do you know?" he asked, brushing her cheek with tenderness. "That I wasn't born to run," she answered. "I was born to find you." And Caelan moved to his core, closed his eyes and held her as one embraces their destiny. Chapter 60. La Sombra del Rey. Isolde entered just as the maid was placing the last pin in Eira's hair. "That should keep it steady against the wind, my lady," the girl said, stepping back to admire her work. Isolde approached and took Eira's hands warmly. "You look beautiful, Eira. More than that, I'm glad you're part of our family." Eira barely managed to hold back tears as she embraced her. "I'm sorry I can't stay longer with you." "The day will come when we're free of John," Isolde replied firmly. "And on that day this kingdom will breathe again." Eira gave her a sad smile. "May it come soon." Isolde led her to the window, and lifted the leather cover. Outside, darkness stretched almost absolute, but in the distance a few lights flickered. "There's your galley," she said. "Just where Caelan promised." Eira narrowed her eyes, her heart pounding. "Are those Caelan and Eira I see by the shore?" "Yes, it seems Caelan's carrying a cask of brandy." They both leaned toward the narrow opening, trying to make out the figures moving in the shadows. Eira stepped back with a trembling sigh. "I'll go down to meet them." But Isolde stopped her, her eyes fixed on the darkness. "Wait, something's happening." Eamon is shouting. A crash tore through the night, the echo of hooves on stone, dozens of them. Eira felt her blood turn to ice. "God," she whispered. "It's John." She gripped Isolde's hand desperately as below in the courtyard, the thunder of horses announced chaos. "Caelan," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Heaven protect him." And she knew, deep within her soul, that the tyrant had come to claim what he believed was his. Chapter 61. Keeping calm. "We must stay calm," Isolde whispered, her voice barely stronger than a prayer. Eira took a deep breath, forcing herself to think. Her cousin's arrival was not only a threat to her, it endangered the entire family that had sheltered Caelan and the orphans. Panic would help no one. The frantic barking of the mastiffs made her turn toward the window. English soldiers were flooding into the courtyard like a swarm. Among them, a man carried a cask. "Dorian has the barrel," murmured Isolde. "That means Caelan and Eamon escaped in the boat." A knot of relief tightened in Eira's chest. "You're safe, my love," she thought, fighting back tears. "I must go to my brother," said Isolde, her face pale. Eira nodded. She couldn't hide forever. If she were discovered, the king's wrath would fall upon the Kelswiths. I'm going with you. They descended the stairs with steady steps. They had barely crossed the hall when the great door swung open, and King John entered, surrounded by knights and torches. Ardrin stepped forward and knelt. "Welcome, Your Majesty. It is an honor to have you at Waycroft Hall." The king removed his gloves, and tossed them to a servant without even looking. "Rise to Kelswith. We are hungry. Present the ladies and lead us to supper." "My sister Isolde de Kelswith," said Ardrin bowing, "and our recent guest your kinswoman, Lady Eira of Lysarne." Eira felt her blood roar in her ears. Still, she lifted her chin and met the gaze of the man who had branded her with years of humiliation. "Welcome to Melton, Your Majesty," she said with a calm she did not feel. For an instant John's face shifted, surprise, anger, then something worse, a satisfied smile. It was impossible to guess what he was plotting. "Eira, cousin," he said at last. "What an unexpected find. What are you doing so far from Caer Thalen?" Eira stilled the trembling in her hands. She had survived siege, loss and fear. She would survive this too. "Fate brought me here, my lord," she replied, her voice steady and sweet as steel. And as the echo of her words faded through the great hall, she knew the most dangerous game of her life had just begun. Chapter 62. Heading home. Caelan paced the deck of the galley, anger and helplessness boiling beneath his skin. The sea wind lashed his face, but even the cold air couldn't cool his thoughts. Only he, Aemon, and the captain remained aboard. The men had set up camp on the shore, resigned to wait. "I hate that they must spend the night without a fire," Caelan said bitterly. "They all expected to be sailing home by now." "They understand, my lord," replied Anselm. "For now we're safe," added Aemon. "Patrols rarely cross this part of the channel. Only one since we arrived." Caelan slowly shook his head. "But the king is in Melton. Wherever he goes, he brings his treasure and his paranoia. He'll double the guard. If he has her with him." He ran a hand through his hair. "I can't leave her in his hands. We must find a way to go back for Eira." Aemon looked at him gravely. "If John was in Hastings, he'll soon head toward Arundel. He won't stay long." "Perhaps. But he's unpredictable. He enjoys playing with her, humiliating her." The memory of Eira, her trembling voice, the sound of her breath, hit him like a wave. "I can't let him destroy her again." "Did she tell you," asked Aemon, "about the broken betrothals?" Caelan clenched his fists, but the fury melted into guilt. He had no right to judge her. She had endured too much fear to trust any man easily. Eira hesitated when the king insisted she sit beside him at the high table in Melton's great hall. The memory of hunger and terror from Caer Thalen still haunted her, yet she lifted her chin with a dignity born of pain. The banquet was lavish, too lavish. None of the usual servants were present. All the food had been seized for the king and his men. "So, cousin," said John, stroking the back of her hand with a greasy smile, "how did you end up here?" "It's a sad story, Your Majesty," she replied, resisting the urge to pull her hand away. "I was at Caer Thalen when the siege began." "Caer Thalen?" he feigned surprise. "And what took you there?" Eira kept her gaze lowered. "I was told you had arranged a betrothal. I was to meet my intended there." The king let out a dry laugh. "That's news to me," he lied. "I suspected as much," she said softly. "My cousin would never have sent me to die in a besieged castle." Her words dripped with false sweetness, the mask of submission. John smiled amused. "True. You're no longer a young girl, but you still know how to grace a table. I suppose you managed to escape." "Yes, Your Majesty. A Norman knight helped me flee, along with a group of orphans. He took me to his castle. Later, his family gave me a galley to return to England. I arrived only a few hours ago. Providence willed that we should meet here." John's eyes gleamed with suspicion. "Providence or destiny," he muttered, draining his cup of wine. "And these Norman nobles? My kin, Ardren said calmly. They send your majesty a cask of Morven's famous apple brandy. The king slammed his cup onto the table. We'll see if it's fit for a king. Ardren gestured to a servant. Only your majesty can judge that. Jon laughed pleased as the liquor burned down his throat. And the Morvens? He asked thickly. They've already departed, majesty, Ardren replied with a faint smile. They did not wish to trouble you. The king nodded, satisfied, never suspecting that the very men he believed gone were even now in the shadows plotting to tear Eira from his grasp. Chapter 63. King Jon. Midnight had long since passed, but King Jon was still ranting about the damned Norman traitors who, according to him, had allowed Caer Thalen to fall. Ardren listened with a strained smile, feigning interest while the soldiers nodded off from exhaustion. Isolde slept, her head resting on Eira's shoulder. Eira herself could barely keep her eyes open. Every word from the king was a hammer to her temples, every laugh a reminder that the man she loved might already be far away, at sea. When weariness and despair finally blurred together, Eira dared to speak. Forgive me, your majesty, she murmured softly. The king raised an eyebrow. What is it, cousin? I only beg permission to escort this young lady to her chamber. I too feel faint. Jon snorted impatiently. Do as you wish. But at dawn we depart. Depart? She asked before she could stop herself. The king's glare cut through her. Did I say you could ask questions? Eira lowered her gaze, biting her lip. She woke Isolde, and helped her to her feet as they left the hall. The moment they crossed the threshold, she heard the king's coarse laughter echo behind them, cruel and empty, like the roar of the sea. Chapter 64. Practice makes perfect. Trying to save Eira under the king's nose was madness, but Caelan had already crossed the threshold of reason. If he takes her to Arundel, I lose her forever, he growled as he rode through the darkness beside Aemon. And if he hears you, you'll lose her all the same, his brother replied dryly. Caelan drew a deep breath, forcing calm. Where's the entrance to the passage? In the cave, though I don't know the exact spot. Then we'll find it by touch. No light. We can't risk being seen. They dragged the boat onto the sand beneath the shelter of the cliffs. The wind smelled of salt and danger. Hugging the rock face, they crept forward until Ardren's dogs began to bark. Caelan pressed himself against the damp stone, holding his breath. Then silence. Only the murmur of the sea. They entered the cave. The air was cold and heavy, and the echo of their footsteps beat like a pulse that belonged to neither of them. Caelan reached out, his hands feeling along the darkness. The rock was rough, alive, as if the tunnel itself were breathing. He moved forward slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. The tale of his ancestors, Gareth, Eila, the secret door, repeated in his mind like a prayer. If memory served, the entrance should be just beyond the first bend. The ground turned slick with wet pebbles. He slipped and struck something solid. Kneeling, he felt along the surface. Wood. Here, he whispered. His fingers traced the cold surface, searching for a handle. When he finally found it, his hand trembled. He pulled hard, and the ancient wood groaned open with a sigh that seemed to breathe through the dark. Behind that door waited everything: risk, love, salvation, or death. Eira started, when Isolde appeared suddenly at the foot of the stairs and motioned for silence. Without a word, she took her hand, and led her through the kitchen to a small pantry. There, Isolde pressed on an old lamp bracket along the back wall. A faint click, a shift of stone, the wall opened. They stepped into a narrow, pitch-black space. Isolde closed the panel behind them, plunging them into complete darkness. Eira's heart raced wildly, but calmed when she saw the steady confidence in the other woman's movements. Isolde struck a spark with flint, and a trembling flame bloomed in her hand. She passed it to Eira, whose fingers shook. Then she felt along the wall until her fingers found a loose stone. With a firm blow she removed it, revealing the gleam of metal, a lever. She climbed up, pulled it hard, and grinned when part of the wall slid aside, revealing a narrow shadowed passage. Practice makes perfect, she whispered. Go now. Eira couldn't speak, Gratitude closed her throat. She embraced Isolde fiercely, took the candle, and stepped through the opening. The wall sealed behind her with a sigh of stone. The passage smelled of damp and salt. Wax dripped down her fingers as she moved forward slowly, following the curve of the tunnel. Each step carried her farther from the king, and closer to hope. The floor sloped downward, slick beneath her boots, the air growing colder. Eira lifted the wavering flame before her, and drew a steady breath. She didn't know what awaited at the end, only that Caelan was there somewhere, waiting for her. And that certainty, like a beacon in the dark, was enough to keep her moving. Caelan held his breath as the hinges creaked and the secret door scraped against the stone. He had tried to open it gently, careful not to stir an air current that might betray them, yet the sound seemed to echo through the night. He cursed under his breath. They had no plan, only instinct and urgency. He touched Aemon's arm, stopping him. "Only one of us should take the risk," he whispered. His brother nodded without protest. Caelan pressed on alone, his hands sliding along the damp walls as he climbed blindly. He remembered that the exit lay near the pantry, though he had no idea how to open it from within. The air grew heavier, the silence deeper. "Guide me," he murmured, calling to the old Morvens who had built this passage centuries ago. Then he froze. A flicker of light trembled ahead, casting living shadows over the rock. He held his breath, someone was coming down. The urge to retreat seized him, until the air brought a faint, unmistakable scent of lavender. His heart lurched. And there, between shadow and wavering light, Eira appeared. She held a candle aloft, the flame trembling across her face, and a small knife between her teeth. When the light fell on him, she stopped. Her eyes widened, fear melted into relief, and the blade slipped from her hand with a soft clink. Caelan ran to her just as she stumbled. He caught her in his arms. "Caelan," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You came for me." He pulled her close, the scent of wax and salt mingling with her skin. "Always," he breathed. "Even if hell itself barred the way, I would come." For a moment, the tunnel vanished. There was only them, the flicker of flame between their faces, the echo of their breath within the ancient walls, and the radiant certainty that they had found each other at last. Chapter 65. Escape. Eira clung to Caelan's solid frame, breathing in his scent as if she could carve it into her soul. She still couldn't believe he had defied death for her. He held her by the waist, picked up the dagger she had dropped, and handed it to her with the faintest hint of a smile. Then he took the candle from her trembling hands, and led the way through the tunnel, guiding her steadily toward the exit. When the echo of the door closing resounded behind them, Eira felt her breath return. No one could follow them now. Caelan helped her up the last slippery steps, and they emerged into the damp night, stumbling over the gravel until the cold air wrapped around them. The clouds hid the moon, yet there was more light than in the tunnel's depths. Aemon waited near the shore. Together they helped her to a small boat. "Come on quickly," Caelan ordered. He lifted her in his arms and set her inside, before pushing the craft into the sea. The icy wind sent a shiver through her. Eira gripped the bench, watching the two men row with fury, as though hell itself chased them. She dared not look at the black water churning below. She fixed her gaze instead on Caelan's face, on the resolve in his eyes. In them she found all the strength she lacked. The sound of oars cutting the sea beat in rhythm with her hope. Soon, the silhouette of the galley emerged from the fog. Caelan lifted her up to Anselm's waiting hands, then climbed aboard behind her. The moment her feet touched the deck, Eira threw herself into his arms, sobbing against his chest. He stroked her damp hair, still in disbelief that she was safe. "You found the passage," he murmured. "Isolde showed me. I only pray she doesn't pay for my escape." Caelan sighed. "When the king discovers you're gone, there will be consequences. But if the boat breaks apart with the tide, he'll think you drowned. He'll never understand why a woman would want to flee from him," she said bitterly. "Ardren will handle him. He's cleverer than he looks." Eira smiled faintly. "Clever? You say it with a northern lilt." "My grandmother was Scottish," he said with a quiet laugh, lowering his voice, "and my mother was from Cambria." She rested her forehead against his. Isolde was so brave. I think she even enjoyed the adventure. She's grown since I last saw her. And you were even braver. You didn't know I was in the tunnel. No, she whispered, but I trusted you wouldn't leave without me. Caelan was about to kiss her when Anselm interrupted. Ready to sail, my lord. As soon as the tide turns. At the stern, sheltered beneath a makeshift canvas in Caelan's arms, Eira drifted into sleep. When she awoke, the gentle rocking of the ship had changed. The tide has turned, he whispered. We're going home. That word, home, echoed within her. Morven, a fortress in a foreign land, yet now her heart recognized it as destiny. The sky remained dark. The only sounds were the oars, the creak of wood, and the murmur of the sea. Without lanterns or fire, they moved shrouded in shadow. The wind brushed her face as the sail filled. From the water she looked up at the cliff. Torches flickered across the courtyard of Waycroft Hall. They're searching for me, she murmured. Let them search, Caelan replied, wrapping his arms around her. They can't reach you now. Aemon's shout shattered the calm. English patrol. Caelan straightened. We'll lose them, he commanded. The men doubled the rhythm of their rowing. The wind's with us, Aemon said between breaths. But soon distant voices, and the shimmer of torches on the sea confirmed they had been spotted. Row, lads. Captain Anselm thundered. They're right on our heels. The galley shuddered under the strength of its crew, seasoned by years at sea. The current aided them, and the English vessel, unwilling to venture too far from the coast, finally gave up the chase. Silence returned, broken only by the whisper of wind across the sail. Caelan looked toward the horizon. They won't risk Norman waters. Aemon nodded. And we're already beyond their reach. Then, as the galley crossed the dark sea, Caelan drew Eira close against him. The cold, the fear, and the long night seemed to fade, replaced by a single certainty: they had survived, and they were together. Chapter 66. Preparations in Morven. Caelan's embrace was a refuge, yet sleep would not come. The murmur of the sea beneath the keel, and the rocking of the ship seemed to sharpen her wakefulness instead of soothing it. She felt his steady breath, his vigilant stillness. I'm sorry, Eira whispered. I've put everyone in danger. If only I'd had the courage to tell you how I felt. He silenced her, with a finger against her lips. We both kept silent longer than we should have. Let's promise something, Eira, from now on no more silence. Whatever we think, we'll say. Whatever we fear, we'll share. She looked at him with tenderness, the quiet emotion of one who hears a promise longed for. I promise, she said softly, her voice trembling. And I with you, Caelan replied, half smiling. Then he raised an eyebrow. Shall we seal the pact with wine, or does your stomach still mistrust the sea? I think I'm holding up like a proper sailor, she answered. But I can't vouch for the wine. Caelan leaned toward a wicker basket and opened it. Ardran thought of everything, he said with amusement. Eira peeked inside, her face lighting up with a smile. Roast chicken, bread, apples and cheese, she exclaimed. And wine, he added, lifting a flask. I arrived just in time to rescue you from hunger. Aemon appeared, laughing. My brother has a rare gift for discovering hidden food. The three of them settled beneath the awning, wrapped in blankets. They ate with numb fingers and soft laughter, as if danger no longer existed beyond the murmur of the sea. Caelan and Aemon spoke to her in English, and that warm effort made Eira feel something close to peace. When the galley docked at dawn in the small port of Osmerhaven, the breeze smelled of fresh bread and salt. The bustle of the pier, the fishermen unloading nets, the trembling sunlight on the water, it all felt like rebirth. Eira drew a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt no fear. Caelan brushed her hand and whispered, You're safe now. She looked at him, and in that gaze she understood that it wasn't only solid ground that restored her life, it was him. The river Vane wound calmly beneath the grey sky. Eira, beside Caelan at the bow, breathed freely for the first time. He slipped an arm around her and murmured, We're almost there. Every ending is a beginning, she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. I fear nothing as long as you're by my side. And you'll never be alone again. You'll have my family's protection. I know, she whispered, with a certainty that moved him more than any vow. When the boat docked, the wind carried the scent of damp earth and hope. They saddled their horses and set off toward Morven, riding side by side. Behind them, Aemon and the men formed a silent escort. No sign of the French army, Caelan said as he saw the castle rising on the headland. Eira gazed at it, bathed in golden light. The first time I saw it, I was afraid. Now, it feels like coming home. Caelan smiled, but his joy faltered as they entered the courtyard. There was an unusual bustle, freshly whitewashed walls, new banners fluttering, servants hurrying with brooms. The air smelled of preparation and expectation. Finn appeared from the tower, his face bright and alert. I bring news, he said. King Philip has been received in Rouen. He'll soon travel across all of Normandy. He could arrive in weeks or days. The weight of politics fell over them like a shadow. Caelan helped Eira dismount, and for a moment their eyes met, silent, steady. I've survived one tyrant, she said with a faint, defiant smile. Philip won't break me. Caelan looked at her as though those words were a shared vow. Around them the courtyard burst into joy. The villagers greeted them with cheers, the orphans ran to wrap themselves around her skirts, and Eira, laughing through tears, stroked their heads, feeling for the first time that she belonged to a place, a story, to someone. Then a clear, warm voice enveloped her. Welcome home, my dear, exclaimed Lady Eira of Morven, kissing her on both cheeks before taking her arm. Eira let herself be led into the castle, her heart pounding. Behind her lay the years of fear. Before her the promise of a new destiny, woven of stone, love and hope. Chapter 67. The Welcome. Caelan's father greeted them at the castle gates with open arms. Welcome home, my children, he said in a deep emotional voice, relieved to see them safe and sound. Then he took Eira's hand and kissed her fingers with respect. I'm dying to hear the full story, though I imagine you're both exhausted. We are, father, Caelan replied, wrapping an arm around Eira as if to protect her even here, among his own. With your permission, we'll bathe and rest before joining you. Of course, Lady Eira interjected, her smile warm and bright upon Eira. We can wait. The steward appeared at once. I'll have hot water and a small meal prepared, milady. Before Caelan could speak, his mother added casually, I believe Caelan and Lady Eira will prefer to share a chamber. A stunned silence filled the air. His father frowned, but Lady Eira stopped him with a gentle nudge of her elbow. Aemon burst into laughter. Then I'll retire to my austere solitude. Amused, Caelan took Eira's hand, which burned with a blush. Thank you, mother, he murmured, leading her toward their room. The bath. Your parents must be scandalized, Eira said as soon as they crossed the threshold. Caelan shook his head with a smile. No. They fell in love at first sight. They understand what that means. She lowered her gaze. I doubt you thought the same when you first met me. I thought you were an old nun, he laughed. And I confess, I feared for my soul. Eira let out a soft laugh. I hated that habit too. It was dreadful. Your disguise was perfect. You fooled me completely. And yet, I was drawn to you, she whispered. He looked at her, surprised. Even when you thought I'd betrayed your king? For years I forced myself to defend him. But when I met you, I understood you acted out of honor, not ambition. Unlike John. Or Ravine. Caelan brushed his hand along her back, his smile turning into desire. I don't feel very honorable right now. A knock on the door broke the moment. Hot water, announced a voice on the other side. Caelan held her close, stopping her from pulling away. When my parents saw you with me, they knew I'd given you my heart, he whispered. Their approval will make everyone in Morven welcome you as one of us. She sighed, deeply moved. You're a dream made flesh, Caelan. He kissed her forehead. Come in. The servants entered, carrying steaming buckets and a large wooden tub. When they left, Eira murmured with amusement, I've never seen such a big tub. Nor a man so big, he replied with mock seriousness. When the servants were gone, Caelan undressed slowly. The steam highlighted the strength of his body, and Eira's eyes followed him, entranced. "What are you doing, love?" he asked, seeing her roll up her sleeves.
"I thought I might help scrub your back."
"No, my love. You're not my servant," he said, reaching out a hand to her. "Undress and come in with me. We'll take care of each other." She hesitated, blushing. "I've never." "Neither have I," he said softly. "But the water's warm, it will do you good." Eira obeyed slowly, letting her clothes fall as if she were shedding her fear. When only a silk shift clung to her skin, Caelan lifted her into his arms and, laughing, carried her into the tub with him. The water wrapped them in warmth. "I love the sound of your laughter," he murmured against her lips. "But I prefer your silence when I kiss you." She gave herself to the kiss, her heart overflowing. There was no haste in their embrace, only promise. Caelan's hands traced her back with tenderness, as if trying to memorize her. Eira rested against his chest, the sound of the water lulling her. "With you, I fear nothing," she whispered. "And you never will," he replied, resting his cheek against her hair. The warmth of the water, the rhythm of his heartbeat, and the scent of soap and wine lulled her to sleep. And before surrendering to dreams, she thought that if this was one, she never wanted to wake. The Naked Ballet. Caelan desired Eira with an almost painful intensity, yet that night he needed nothing more than to hold her in his arms, to feel her soft breasts resting in his hands and the pulse of her breath against his skin. Each time his lips brushed her shoulder, or his finger traced the curve of her nipple, she let out a moan that shook his very soul. Eira's hair, finally loose, fell around her neck like strands of fire, and the contrast with the steam and the dim light hypnotized him. The water began to cool too soon. Caelan lifted her effortlessly, wrapping her in a thick towel before setting her gently on the floor. She clung to him, shivering, and he dried her slowly, as if his hands were learning her body by heart, every curve, every shadow. "You're spoiling me," she murmured with a trembling smile. "Spoiling you will be my noblest task," he replied, still caressing her, "and my greatest joy." Eira took another towel, and began to dry him. Her touch was tender, yet playful. "Turn around," she asked, a mischievous spark in her eyes. He obeyed, and she ran the cloth over his back, his shoulders, his strong arms. She couldn't stop looking at him. There was something serene and powerful in him, a manhood that wasn't vanity or dominance but contained strength, noble, deeply human. And yet the thought made her blush. They were not husband and wife yet, the mystery between them remained. But his presence filled her with a mixture of peace and trembling that no words could explain. Caelan turned to her and smiled, sensing her silence. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly.
"That you're unlike anyone I've ever known," she said, lowering her gaze.
"And that I'll have to learn not to be afraid of what I feel." "Then we'll learn together," he murmured, drawing her back against his chest. The world hung suspended in the warm haze of steam. Nothing else existed but the whisper of water, and the uneven rhythm of their shared breath.
"You're perfect," she whispered, her voice barely a thread.
"Like a living statue." Caelan smiled, charmed and undone by desire. He turned to her, his body damp, tense and warm, and when Eira lifted her eyes their mouths met. There was no haste, only gratitude. The air between them smelled of water and promise.
"You're not made of stone," she murmured, touching his chest.
"You're real. And all yours," he breathed before pulling her back into his arms where the world seemed to dissolve. The Curse of the Morven. "I'll have to learn how to pour your wine," Caelan teased as he adjusted the cloak around her shoulders. "I'd make a dreadful valet for a lady." Eira laughed softly. "I doubt anyone in this castle would ever mistake you for a servant." He leaned close until his lips brushed her ear. "I don't care what they think. They can believe what they like, that the Viscount has fallen prey to the old Morven curse." She looked at him, intrigued. "The curse?" Caelan smiled, a slow warm smile filled with mischief and affection. "They say all the men of my bloodline are doomed the same way, they fall hopelessly in love with their wives. They can't govern their hearts or their desires. They're incapable of pretending." Eira tilted her head, amusement glimmering in her eyes. "If that's a curse, I wonder what they'd call a blessing.
Perhaps they don't know the difference, he replied, stepping closer.
The Morvens have always loved too deeply and too soon. She held his gaze, tenderness trembling in her lashes. Then I fear you're already lost, my lord. I have been for some time, Caelan confessed, his voice low, almost reverent.
And I don't wish to be saved.
Eira lowered her eyes, as though the weight of his gaze enveloped her completely. Be careful, she whispered. Some curses last a lifetime. Caelan took her hand and kissed it slowly, his lips barely grazing her skin. I hope so, he murmured. Some curses deserve to be eternal. The silence that followed was soft, almost sacred. Outside, the wind sighed against Morven's towers, but within that chamber everything seemed suspended, as if time itself had chosen to grant them a moment of grace. Chapter 68. Encounter in the solarium. Eira, still blushing, stammered that she didn't need a bath. She chose a dress from those offered to her upon her arrival at Morven, trying to focus on each ribbon, each fold, to steady the rush of emotions flooding her. When she stepped into the corridor, Caelan was already waiting. Leaning against the wall, he looked as though he had been there forever, as if the whole castle had been waiting with him. Such deep sighs so early in the day, he murmured, drawing her gently toward him. What are you thinking, my lady? That everyone seems to have understood my feelings before I did, she replied, smiling shyly. Even the youngest maid knew before I did myself. Caelan let out a low laugh. My brother warned me as much. He said only a fool would fail to see the obvious. Then we were two fools, she said tenderly. Two very fortunate fools, he corrected, intertwining his fingers with hers as they walked toward the solar. When they entered, Caelan's parents rose. The earl stepped forward to clasp his son's hand and gallantly kiss Eira's.
At last home, he said, pride glinting in his eyes.
And alive, that's no small blessing. Caelan inclined his head. Our only regret is that it took us so long to admit what we felt. Ah, that, the earl chuckled. Your mother and I had no such luxury. When danger is near, one learns quickly what truly matters. Lady Mairead embraced Eira warmly. And you've learned it well, dear one. It shows in your eyes. It was Isolde who saved me, Eira admitted. Without her, I'd never have found the secret passage. The earl nodded, pleased. Then the old tunnel of Melton has once again served the Morven cause. It wouldn't be the first time love and danger crossed paths beneath our stones. Eira lowered her gaze. I only fear King John's wrath. He needs no reason for cruelty. And we have no control over that, Lady Mairead replied calmly. But life goes on and so does love. The earl looked at them both, brave and affectionate. Precisely why we must prepare. King Philip draws near and time is short. I believe the moment has come to celebrate your union. Eira's heart ignited. She had feared judgment and reproach, yet found instead understanding. A family that welcomed her not out of duty but out of love. Caelan squeezed her hand, and in his eyes she saw the certainty of a shared future, stronger than fear, brighter than any past. Forced to leave. Caelan caught his father's calculating look before the man even broached the subject they both dreaded. Our kinsmen the MacLachlan rule over Eilon, he explained, turning to Eira.
It lies south of here. It sounds like an Irish name, she remarked with a light smile.
It is in a way, Caelan replied. An ancestress of mine married an Irishman, Ronan MacRaith. As her dowry, they received that castle. Since then, the blood of the Morven line has mingled with many lands and many accents. Eira smiled with curiosity, but the earl interjected gravely, and yet all those lands are now at risk. King Philip's arrival in Normandy changes everything. We must ensure every stronghold is ready to withstand any attempt at seizure. Caelan nodded, understanding what his father did not need to say aloud.
Then I must leave at once, he said, taking Eira's hand.
It is my duty. She met his gaze.
For how long?
15 days, perhaps less. I promise. She tried to smile, but he felt the tremor in her breath. Lady Mairead broke the tension gently. 15 days will be enough to arrange a splendid wedding. We may even make better progress without you, my son. You are a constant distraction." Eira laughed, grateful for the levity. From his corner, Aemon quickly added, "I'll go with you, brother. Anything's better than helping with ribbons and flowers." "Your company will be welcome," Caelan replied, amused. And though he was glad for his brother's support, he couldn't help but feel secretly relieved to keep his charming sibling far from his betrothed. That night, Eira lay in Caelan's arms, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing. They had spent hours together, and still the thought of parting felt like a fresh wound. "I can't believe your parents aren't scandalized," she whispered with a shy smile. "You are my wife before God," he replied, brushing her cheek with his fingers. "And soon you'll be my wife before all." She played with the edge of the blanket. "I hope this promise finds its way to fulfillment this time." Caelan pulled her closer. "It will, I swear. And when I return, nothing will part us again." "I'll have to get used to your vast family," she murmured. "Your mother told me about so many castles, I lost count." Caelan smiled. "Eilon Donvar Belen Garu, each with its own story. My ancestors married Irish, Spanish, English, Scottish, even Danish blood. I suppose love knows no borders." "Nor does your lineage," she said with a laugh, enchanted.
"It's our strength," he said gravely.
"Union keeps us safe, even in the days of fickle kings." Eira rested her head on his chest. "Then go without worry. I'll wait for you. Though I can't promise not to be distracted thinking of you." He stroked her hair, looking at her tenderly. "Be as distracted as you wish, my love. When I return, I'll make this chamber wholly yours. And perhaps not even the castle walls will hold us." She laughed, twining her fingers with his, and in that instant she knew that no distance, nor king nor war could ever separate them again. Chapter 69. Highs and Lows. The Morvens did all they could to keep Eira distracted during Caelan's absence. Determined not to yield to longing, she threw herself into the preparations for their wedding. She spent her mornings surrounded by fabrics and needles, while the castle seamstresses fitted her with a silk gown so beautiful it seemed woven from a dream. Father Corbinian, meticulous as ever, delved into her past. Eira endured the discomfort with the calm that Lady Mered's presence gave her. At last the priest confirmed she had never been married, and peace returned to her heart. Caelan's mother also took it upon herself to instruct her in the duties of a future countess. For 3 days she toured the kitchens, storerooms and workshops with Sir Brannock the steward. Eira found comfort in the sincere respect everyone showed her. 15 days after Caelan's departure, Eira was in the solarium speaking with his parents, when Finn entered with a grave expression. "News has come from Waycroft Hall," he announced. "It seems King John flew into a rage the morning Eira disappeared. He burned the stables before leaving." Eira turned pale. "I knew it. It's my fault."
"No, child," the Earl replied.
"John is known to set fire to whatever pleases him, even to those who welcomed him with honor." Though his words were true, they did little to ease the pang of guilt that pierced her. "Were any horses lost?" she asked tensely.
"None, thank God," Finn answered.
"Repairs have already begun. But I fear there's worse news." Eira held her breath. "The king has ordered Isolde to appear at court. He has declared that Ardren is unfit to protect his sister. From now on she is John's ward." Eira covered her face with her hands, stifling a sob.
"She's paying the price for helping me escape."
Lady Mairead took her hand. "She would do it again, without hesitation. And if the king knew she aided your flight, her punishment would be far harsher. There are fates worse than the court." The Earl nodded gravely. "Ardren will do well to wait. John forgets his whims as quickly as he enforces them." "Even so," Eira whispered, "to be torn from her home and her brother, it's cruel." Lady Mairead caressed her gently.
"Nothing must dim your happiness.
Soon you'll wed my son, and he will return to you all the light the past once stole away." 2 weeks stretched into 3, and anxiety began to gnaw at her spirit. She imagined 1,000 dangers, ambushed roads, enemy armies, courtly intrigues. But Caelan sent letters faithfully, brief messages written in his firm hand, assuring her that he and Aemon were safe and that the Morven stronghold stood in peace. Even so, in those uncertain days, every journey through Normandy was a wager against fate. At last came the news that eased her fears. Caelan and Aemon had reached Castle Garu and would soon begin their return. The joy was short-lived. The next morning, 2 messengers from Rhuarlan arrived with new orders. King Philip demands the presence of Alaric, Earl of Morven, and his heir, Caelan's father announced gravely. He has summoned all Norman nobles to pay him homage. He looked at Eira with regret. And of course it is no invitation. It is a command. Eira's heart tightened. Each time peace seemed within her grasp, the world rose again to claim its tribute.